another idea that faster evolution is based on faster iteration. In other words, the faster we do things, the faster we learn, the faster we improve. And how can we build that into design? I mean, the natural world deals with that very well. I mean, the reason viruses evolve so fast is that they reproduce every few minutes. And it's one of the reasons why we have such a hard time keeping up with them. Whereas, we evolve every 20 years. We reproduce every 20 years. It's a lot slower for us to evolve. And I think in a way business is more like us. Business reproduces relatively slowly. Well, how can we think about business being more like a virus? How can we find ways of learning faster? How can we find ways of iterating faster? I think one of those ways that we can find to iterate faster is to not have to know all the answers before we do things. Sort of an interesting, simple example of that piece of work that we did recently with State Farm, the insurance company in the US. They launched this thing, which is Nextdoor, which is a place. It's not a bank. It's a place to learn about. For them to learn about a new generation of customers. It's a place for customers to come and learn about insurance and financial services and that kind of. It's kind of coaching rather than financial advising. And they have no idea what the business model of this place is going to be. They don't actually know whether they're ever going to build another one. They just built it in order to learn. And I think this idea that we can put things out into the world, this idea of launching things in order to learn, not because we already know how we're necessarily going to make money out of it or how make a business out of it, is I think quite a useful idea when we're thinking about this sort of increase in kind of the reproductive cycle, if you like, the pace of iteration in business. And I think we can design learning vehicles that we can put out into the world that allow us to innovate faster ultimately. So I think that's a kind of interesting idea. Another idea that's related to that is what I call sort of selective emergence. We do have one advantage over actual natural biological systems. Natural biological systems, all of the improvement is random, right? It's based on mutation. There's some guiding principles perhaps, but there's no guiding intelligence. Well, we have the benefit of potentially using the best of both when we're thinking about designing. And there are technologies around already that actually do that allow us to use this idea of selective emergence, to rapidly iterate things, but actually help nudge them and guide them towards some outcome that we want. And one technology that does that already is something we call genetic algorithms. So in software today, it's quite common to build algorithms that reproduce themselves with certain rules applied, not knowing what the optimal version of that piece of code is going to be, but evolution gets you to it. But you've applied certain rules so that you nudge it in the same direction, right direction. That idea is used in a lot of different places today, including in engineering and in design, and in this next example, in art. So this is something called a strand beast. And it's a remarkable structure. It's one of many that a Dutch sculptor by the name of Theo Jansen creates that walk up and down beaches in Holland. They're all made out of PVC plumbing tubes, plumbing pipe. And they are self-articulating. They're blown by the wind. And they're remarkable to look at. And the structure, this sort of hip and foot joint, which he uses on all of his animals, he used a genetic algorithm to design that. He didn't know what the right ultimate solution was, so he designed an algorithm, and it kept iterating till it created the most efficient foot and hip mechanism to make these sculptures with. So I think we should be using these kinds of technologies in design more. We're seeing it in architecture. You see architects using a similar kind of technology for creating facades of buildings today. The ones that look very much more organic than they used to. They're often using genetic algorithms to do that. I think as designers, we need to kind of remember our relationship with science a little bit more. I think designers as designers, we're often very good at what I call exploration, which is divergence, asking questions, but without any real sense of a hypothesis. And I think we need to sort of relearn how to, some good scientific methodology. I encouraged us as designers to think about good scientific method, both when we're designing things, and services and systems, but also when we're designing businesses. How do we ask the right interesting question? How do we have hypotheses? How do we design effective experiments? And more importantly, how do we share learnings? And I think in some ways you could argue that that startups look like this, right? There are a series of nested questions, and we need to figure out. We need to use the right methodologies for answering those questions. And I think sometimes we've forgotten that. Certainly in design. We need to focus on the idea of fitness. Biological systems naturally focus on fitness, and that's really what evolution's all about. It's strive for fitness based on whatever the environmental context might be, and all kinds of biological systems do that. They strive for fitness. Well, what's the equivalent of that in business, or what's the equivalent of that in design? I think one way of thinking about it is purpose. That organizations that have purpose and know what that purpose is tend to be able to design in a less top-down way. Now, that's not always the case. There are some organizations like this one that have extremely clear purpose and design in an incredibly top-down way. But I always believe that this idea that Steve Jobs had many, many, many years ago, this notion of insanely great, was extremely valuable to him in the organization, because the reality was even Steve Jobs couldn't make every single design decision at Apple, and didn't try to. But he had this sort of definition of it's got to be so good that you're kind of shocked that you could actually create something that good. That was the kind of driving purpose of the organization. And that allowed many, many more people to contribute to the greatness of Apple than would have been the case if there had been no purpose. Imagine an organization that didn't have this, but still had a Steve Jobs. I think it would have been impossible for him to achieve what he achieved. I think it was his incredible skill, his incredible vision, plus an organization that believed in the notion of being insanely great, that was one of the reasons that Apple was so successful. And then my final one, I think, in my list of possible principles for a kind of more biological approach to design, and this one, in a way, is the biggest challenge to many designers, is that design's never done. There's something that in the architectural world. Are there any architects here before I start insulting architects? Oh, okay. There's something in the architectural world which is this notion of kind of life after open house. That you see all these perfect photographs of buildings just at the moment when you hand it over to the client. And you so rarely see the photographs of what happens afterwards. And I think it's natural. I do the same thing. I design a product, I take a perfect picture of that perfect model. That's even often before the manufacturers get their hand on it, never mind the user. And that's when the thing is closest to my vision. And I think that's when I'm done. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course that's not when it's done. It's when it's done, it's never really done, right? It's in the hands of users, it's getting adapted and evolved and being used for things we didn't expect it to be used for. And we've got to get more comfortable with that idea as designers. And I think in some media that's easier than others. I think this is a media where that's becoming a matter of course. So in the world of video games, particularly in online games like World of Warcraft, design is going on all the time. Yes, there's an environment that was created, but the design of behavior, the design of the events themselves, the characters, all of that's going on all the time by the people that are participating in the design. And I think design's going to look much more like this in the future than it is this idea of this pristine, perfect thing that we then kind of give to people and let them wreck it.